In the city of Zamora, people often pointed at Amara and Darius as the kind of couple others could only dream to be. They had everything that looked perfect, from the outside: big cars, a beautiful mansion in the heart of the city, and smiles that looked picture-perfect at every party they attended. Amara was graceful, always dressed in elegant traditional gowns that made her stand out, and Darius was charming, a man people respected in business circles. Whenever they walked into a room together, they looked like a storybook couple, the kind that made everyone believe love and success could truly go hand in hand. But behind the closed doors of their mansion, things were far from perfect. The same man who held Amara's hand at public events often left her feeling invisible when no one was watching. She cooked his favorite meals, smiled for his friends, and stood by him at every gathering, but her heart often ached from loneliness. Their marriage looked like a dream to everyone else, yet for Amara, it was slowly turning into a silent battle she could not share with the world. No one around them could imagine the storm that was quietly building inside their home. "Do you want me to move on and write part 2, a mother-in-law's demands, in the same detailed, emotional way?" From the very first day Amara entered her new home as a bride, she realized she wasn't just married to Darius, she was also married to his mother's endless demands. Mama Kendi was a woman who loved power and control, and she made it clear that Amara had to follow her rules if she wanted peace in the family. She would stand in the middle of the living room giving orders as though she were the queen of the house. She told Amara how to dress, insisting her clothes must always be plain so she wouldn't outshine others. She told her what time to wake up, how to cook meals exactly to her liking, and even corrected the way Amara walked, saying a wife should walk softly, with her head lowered as a sign of respect. At first, Amara tried her best to obey. She reminded herself that Mama Kendi was older and deserved respect. She swallowed her pride when criticized and stayed silent when scolded in front of relatives. She told herself it was only temporary, that maybe in time Mama Kendi would soften and see her as a daughter instead of a servant. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of the endless commands began to crush her spirit. Every little thing Amara did was questioned. If the food was too spicy, Mama Kendi shouted. If it was not spicy enough, she complained. If Amara dressed elegantly, Mama Kendi accused her of being proud. If she dressed simply, Mama Kendi called her lazy. Nothing Amara did was ever enough. Darius often watched silently, sometimes nodding in agreement with his mother, and sometimes pretending not to notice. That silence hurt Amara the most. The man who promised to protect her on their wedding day was now letting her drown in humiliation. Inside, Amara's heart began to ache. She knew she wasn't weak, but the constant control made her feel trapped. It wasn't just a mother-in-law's demands anymore. It was a slow erasing of her identity piece by piece. And deep down, she wondered how long she could keep enduring it before something inside. The dinner at Makura Hills estate was supposed to be a celebration. Relatives, business partners, and friends gathered around the long wooden table, decorated with golden candles and bowls of steaming food. Laughter filled the air, and Darius moved from guest to guest, showing off his wealth and influence. Amara, dressed in a flowing deep blue gown, moved quietly through the room, making sure everyone was comfortable. She wore a gentle smile, even though her heart felt heavy. For her, these dinners were always the same. A stage where she was expected to play the perfect wife under Mama Kendi's sharp eyes. As the food was served and glasses clinked, Mama Kendi's voice suddenly cut through the laughter. "Amara, kneel down and serve the wine properly. That is how a respectful wife shows honor to her husband's guests." Her words carried the sting of command, not suggestion. The room grew quiet for a moment, all eyes shifting to Amara. Amara's chest tightened. She looked at Mama Kendi, then at the guests, some of whom were already exchanging curious glances. The humiliation in the demand was clear. Mama Kendi wasn't asking her to serve wine. She was asking her to bow like a maid in front of everyone. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she held the bottle, but her eyes stayed steady. With a calm voice she said, "I will serve the wine, Mama, but I will not kneel." The silence that followed was heavy. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mama Kendi's eyes widened with shock and anger, her lips tightening as though Amara had just committed the greatest insult. Darius's gaze turned cold, his pride wounded in front of the people he wanted to impress. Amara poured the wine into the glasses one by one, her hands steady despite the storm rising in the room. Inside, her dignity refused to bend. She would rather face their disapproval than destroy herself by kneeling to satisfy cruelty. At that moment, she knew something had shifted. The quiet endurance she had. The room had already grown tense after Amara refused to kneel, but no one expected what came next. Darius's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with wounded pride. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor, and before Amara could step back, his hand flew across her face. The sharp crack of the slap echoed in the hall, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the laughter that had filled the air only minutes earlier. The room froze. Guests who had just been enjoying their meal now sat in stunned silence. Some gasped, others lowered their eyes in discomfort, while a few whispered in disbelief. No one moved. All eyes darted between Darius, standing tall with anger, and Amara, who staggered slightly but did not fall. Her cheek burned red, but her spirit did not crumble. Amara placed her hand against her face, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a moment her whole world seemed to collapse around her. The humiliation was sharp, the betrayal deep, but what shook everyone more was the strength in her posture. She did not bow her head. She did not run away. She stood tall, her dignity shining through the pain. Darius, breathing heavily, looked around the table as though daring anyone to speak. Mama Kendi sat stiffly, her lips pressed together, silently approving the punishment. To her, Amara had crossed the line by refusing her command. But the silence of the guests told another story. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their faces pale, unable to believe what they had just witnessed from the man they once admired. Amara's tears finally slipped down, but she made no attempt to hide them. Instead, she let them fall, each tear carrying the weight of every insult, every command, every silent wound she had endured. And though her heart felt heavy, something stronger began to rise within her. She realized in that moment she had nothing left to lose. The respect they had stripped from her she would take back. Not by shouting, not by beg. Amara's cheek stung, the mark of Darius's hand burning against her skin, but she refused to let it bend her spirit. Her eyes filled with tears, hot and heavy, and for the first time she did not try to blink them away. She let them fall, one by one, like silent witnesses of the pain she had carried for so long. The entire hall watched in breathless silence, expecting her to break, to lower her head in shame, to quietly leave the room so the evening could continue as if nothing had happened. But Amara had no intention of walking away defeated. She straightened her back and lifted her chin, her tears glistening in the golden light of the candles. She looked around at the faces staring at her, some filled with pity, others with unease, and a few with silent admiration. With every second she stood her ground, she turned their pity into respect. She was not the weak, submissive woman they thought they could silence. She was a woman who had endured too much, and now she was done being invisible. Darius, still standing, glared at her as though daring her to challenge him further. Mama Kendi's lips curved into a smug smile, convinced her son had put Amara back in her place. But Amara's silence was louder than any scream. Her tears were not a sign of defeat, they were the final warning before a storm. Deep inside, Amara remembered the late nights, the unanswered calls, the strange perfumes on his shirts, the whispers she had ignored for months. She had collected everything, every proof of the betrayal she had suspected. She had waited patiently, quietly, for the right moment to reveal it. And now, standing in front of them all with her cheek burning and her dignity intact, she knew that moment had come. They thought her tears meant weakness. But Amara knew better. Her tears were fire, her silence was power, and her next move would shatter every illusion of the man who had just struck her. Shall I continue with part 6, the whispered rumors, in the same style and... For weeks, Amara had been living with questions that never left her mind. She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to Darius's phone buzz long after midnight. He would step out onto the balcony, speaking in a low voice, always claiming it was business. But no business call carried laughter that soft, or whispers that tender. When he returned, he would slip into bed smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, sweet, expensive and unfamiliar. She never said a word, but each time, a piece of her heart chipped away. His sudden trips out of town only deepened her suspicions. He would leave with a briefcase, promising important meetings, but Amara noticed the tickets were never booked under his company's name. Sometimes he returned home with lipstick stains faintly brushed against his collar, as if hoping she wouldn't notice. She noticed everything. She said nothing. Because Amara wasn't just a woman in pain. She was a woman planning her next move. Quietly, she began to collect proof. Phone records, receipts from luxury hotels, photos slipped to her by sympathetic staff who had seen him with another woman. Every piece of evidence went into a small folder she kept hidden, waiting for the day she would need it. It wasn't anger that guided her, it was clarity. She knew the truth would reveal itself, but she wanted to control when and how it did. And that night, when Darius's hand landed on her face in front of everyone, Amara realized the stage had been set for her. The humiliation he had tried to trap her in would become the very moment she would turn the tables. The whisper she had carried in silence would become a storm too loud for anyone to ignore. He had broken her trust, but he had also given her the perfect reason to show the world who he really was. She wiped the last of her tears, her mind steady and her heart fierce. If Darius thought she would stay silent forever, he was about to learn that silence, when broken, can destroy loud. The next day, the mansion of Darius was alive with noise and movement. Cars lined the driveway, and the grand hall glittered with chandeliers and polished marble floors. It was the big family reunion, the kind of gathering where Darius loved to show off his wealth and power. Relatives flew in from different cities, business partners arrived with their wives, and friends filled the air with chatter and laughter. Waiters moved around with trays of drinks, and music played softly in the background, setting the mood for celebration. At the very front, Mama Kendi sat proudly, dressed in a rich burgundy wrapper and gold headpiece. She looked like a queen on her throne, nodding as people came one by one to greet her. She smiled as though nothing had happened the night before, as though her son hadn't humiliated his wife in front of half the family. In her mind, Amara had been put in her place, and the chapter was closed. Darius walked through the hall greeting guests, his laughter loud, his charm on full display. He wanted no one to see the cracks beneath the surface. For him, appearances were everything. To the guests, he looked like the perfect host, but beneath his polished smile, his pride was still sore from Amara's refusal and her quiet defiance. And then there was Amara. She hadn't appeared yet, and her absence made some of the guests curious. Whispers began to ripple through the hall, some about her beauty, others about the tension they sensed but couldn't name. People leaned closer to one another, wondering where she was and if she would even dare to come after what had happened. What no one knew was that Amara had been preparing for this moment. The slap from last night had not broken her. It had sharpened her resolve. Today, in front of the same people who admired Darius, in front of the same mother-in-law who sought to humiliate her, Amara was going to show them the truth. And when she walked through those doors, nothing in that hall would ever be the S. The doors of the grand hall opened slowly, and all the noise inside seemed to melt into silence. Amara stepped in, her steps calm and steady, her chin lifted with quiet pride. She wore a breathtaking emerald green traditional gown that shimmered under the lights, embroidered with golden patterns that caught every eye. Her head wrap matched perfectly, tall and elegant, framing her face like a crown. In that moment, she looked less like a woman who had been humiliated the night before and more like a queen who had come to claim her power. Every head turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses stopped midway to lips. Even the waiters carrying trays slowed their steps. There was something about her presence that demanded attention, not with noise, not with force, but with the strength of her calm. She did not rush, she did not stumble. She walked as if she owned the ground beneath her feet. Mama Kendi's smile froze, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of Amara. She had expected a broken woman, hiding in shame, not this vision of dignity and fire. Darius's laughter caught in his throat, his face stiffening as he realized every guest was no longer looking at him, but at the woman he thought he had crushed. Amara's eyes scanned the hall, meeting the stares of relatives, friends, and business partners. Some looked shocked, others curious, and a few even smiled faintly, as though silently rooting for her. She did not flinch. She did not look away. Instead, she let them see her strength, her beauty, her unbroken spirit. When she reached the center of the room, she stopped and stood tall, her emerald gown flowing around her like water. She was no longer the quiet, obedient wife in the corner. She was a woman who had endured, who had been tested, and who had risen stronger than anyone expected. Amara hadn't come to sit quietly in the shadows. She hadn't come to bow to Mama Kendi's commands. She had come for one reason, to finally be heard. And the entire howl. The chatter in the hall picked up again as Amara stood at the center. But it wasn't the same as before. People whispered more than they spoke, their eyes darting between her and Darius, wondering what was about to happen. Some tried to keep smiling, pretending nothing was unusual, but everyone felt the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Amara stood still, her emerald gown catching the light, her eyes steady and sharp. Then with a calm voice that cut through the noise she spoke. "Darius," she said, her tone clear enough for every corner of the hall to hear. The room fell into an uneasy quiet, all ears turning toward her. Darius stiffened, forcing a smile as though she were about to praise him. But Amara's next words shattered the illusion. "Should I keep pretending to be the loyal wife you don't deserve? Or should I show them who you really are?" The silence that followed was deafening. Forks stopped midair, glasses trembled in hands, and every head turned to Darius. His confident smile slipped, his eyes flashing with panic for the first time. Mama Kendi gasped, her hand clutching her wrapper, unable to believe her daughter-in-law had just challenged her son in front of everyone. Whispers began to ripple across the hall. Some leaned closer to each other, murmuring in disbelief. Others stared at Amara with wide eyes, their curiosity burning. What was she talking about? What truth was she hiding? Amara did not flinch under the weight of their stares. Her voice grew stronger as she repeated, "Should I stay silent or should I show them the man behind this mask?" Her words hung in the air like a knife, daring Darius to stop her. But for the first time Darius had no clever reply, no proud defense. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, sweat beginning to gather at his forehead. Everyone waited, breathless, caught between shock and anticipation. Amara's question had turned the night upside down. She had broken the silence of years, and in that, Amara reached into her clutch and pulled out a small device. Her movements were slow, steady, and deliberate. The guests leaned forward, unsure of what she was about to do. With a single press, the large projector screen at the front of the hall flickered to life. At first, the light startled some of the guests, but then the images appeared, and the room erupted with gasps. There was Darius, not the polished man in a designer suit standing before them, but Darius in hotel rooms, laughing, holding another woman in his arms. The photos were clear, undeniable, taken over weeks and months. His smile was wide in every picture, his arms wrapped around a woman who was not his wife. Then came short video clips, him opening doors for her, kissing her in lobbies, whispering into her ear. And finally the receipts appeared on the screen. Hotel bills, restaurant payments, expensive jewelry purchases, all signed with his name. The hall trembled with shock. Some guests covered their mouths, others turned their heads in shame for him. Whispers became louder, like a storm sweeping through the crowd. Is this real? How could he? After all his speeches about family and respect? The sound of disbelief filled the room like thunder. Mama Kendi's face turned pale, her proud posture collapsing as she stared at the screen. She opened her mouth to speak but no words came out. The son she defended so fiercely, the man she forced Amara to obey, was now exposed as a liar, a hypocrite, and a cheat. Darius's face drained of color. He stepped forward trying to block the screen, but the images only grew clearer, brighter, undeniable. "This is nothing. Lies!" he shouted, but his voice cracked, betraying his fear. The evidence was too strong, too public, too real to escape. Amara stood still in the center of the chaos, her chin lifted, her tears long gone. She didn't scream, she didn't gloat. She simply let the truth speak for itself. And in that moment everyone in the hall knew. Mama Kendi sat frozen in her chair, her eyes locked on the glowing screen. The images of her son with another woman seemed to stab at her pride with every flicker. Her hand flew to her chest, fingers trembling against the heavy beads of her necklace. For years she had barked orders at Amara, treating her like a servant instead of a wife. She had forced her to obey, humiliate herself, and bow to her son as though he were flawless. And now, in front of the very people she wanted to impress, the truth stood naked. Her perfect son was nothing but a cheat. The room around her buzzed with whispers and gasps. Guests stole glances at Mama Kendi, waiting for her to speak, to defend, to explain. But for once her sharp tongue failed her. Her lips parted, yet no words came out. Her face turned pale, and the proud sparkle in her eyes dimmed with shame. She could feel the judgment in the stares of relatives and friends who had once admired her strength. Now they saw only the foolishness of a mother who built her power on lies. She looked at Amara standing tall in the middle of the hall, dressed like a queen, calm and unshaken. For the first time Mama Kendi saw the difference between them. The woman she had mocked and ordered around carried herself with dignity, while she, the mother-in-law who demanded respect, now sat broken and humiliated. Her heart pounded and a bitter taste filled her mouth. All her cruelty, all her pride, all the nights she told herself she was protecting her family, it had all turned into dust. The same guests she wanted to impress were now whispering about her failure as a mother. She had forced Amara to stay loyal, blind to the fact that her son was the one destroying the marriage. Mama Kendi lowered her head, unable to face the crowd. For the first time in her life she was speechless. And in that silence, everyone understood that her reign of control had ended. Do you want me to continue with part 12, The Collapse of Darius in the Sam? Darius stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as though the air itself had turned against him. His face, once full of pride and confidence, was now pale, drained of every ounce of color. The man who loved to walk into rooms with his head high, who always demanded respect and admiration, suddenly looked small-cornered, exposed, powerless. The weight of the evidence flashing on the screen crushed him more than any slap or insult could. His pride, his arrogance, his carefully polished image, all shattered in a matter of seconds. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to explain, but nothing came out. His throat was dry, his words stuck. Each attempt to defend himself sounded weaker, emptier, more desperate. This is nothing," he stammered, but even he knew no one believed it. The guests stared at him with a mix of shock and disgust. His business partners whispered to each other, their expressions sharp with disappointment. Some relatives shook their heads, unwilling to look him in the eye. The respect he had once commanded had dissolved into pity and shame. Darius wiped at his forehead, sweat gathering even in the cool air of the hall. He tried to move toward the screen, as if blocking it would erase the truth, but it was too late. The damage was done. The images, the receipts, the proof, they screamed louder than his voice ever could. His secret, once carefully hidden, was now everyone's conversation. For the first time in his life, Darius felt what it was like to be powerless. The man who struck his wife to show strength, who allowed his mother to command cruelty, was now stripped of every layer of authority. His downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent, crushing, and irreversible. He looked at Amara standing tall, calm, unbroken. And in her silence he saw the truth. She had won. He hadn't just lost his wife's respect. He had lost his dignity, his reputation, and the very image he spent his life protecting. There was no escape left for. The hall buzzed with noise, but it was not the joyful laughter Darius had planned for this reunion. It was whispers, sharp and heavy, that spread from one corner to another like wildfire. Some guests shook their heads in disgust, unable to believe the man they once admired could fall so low. Others whispered loudly, no longer bothering to hide their conversations. How could he do this? And after hitting her in front of us? What kind of man treats his wife like that? The shame was thick in the air, and every word cut deeper into Darius's pride. His business partners, the men who once raised glasses with him and called him brother, now looked at him with narrowed eyes. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes. This scandal wasn't just about his marriage, it was about his character, his trustworthiness, his entire reputation. Deals that had taken years to build now seemed to crumble with a single glance at that screen. One by one they turned away, refusing to meet his eyes, ashamed to even be associated with him. Relatives who once boasted about his success sat in silence, staring down at their plates. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, others avoided looking at him altogether. A few quietly moved closer to Amara, as if to show where their respect now belonged. The hall that used to echo with his laughter now echoed with his downfall. And at the center of it all stood Darius, the man who had slapped his wife to prove his dominance. Now he stood exposed, stripped of all the power he thought he had. No one applauded him. No one defended him. Even Mama Kendi sat quietly, her head bowed, too broken to save him from the humiliation. For the first time, everyone saw Darius not as the successful, charming man he pretended to be, but as the man who betrayed his vows, abused his wife, and destroyed his own honor. And as the whispers grew louder, it became clear that nothing could ever restore the respect he had just lost. Do you want me to move? Hey? Amara stood for a moment longer in the center of the hall, letting the silence and whispers wash over her. Her eyes, once filled with tears, were now calm and steady. She had given the truth its voice, and there was nothing more to say. Without raising her voice, without throwing insults, she had destroyed the mask Darius wore for so long. She did not need to explain herself further. The evidence spoke louder than any words. Slowly she turned. Her emerald gown shimmered as she moved, every step filled with grace. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, and she didn't look back at the man who had humiliated her. Instead, she walked with her head held high, her shoulders straight, her spirit unbroken. Around her, the hall erupted with gasps and murmurs, but none of it touched her. She was no longer walking through as a wife desperate for respect. She was walking out as a woman who had claimed her dignity back. Darius reached out as if to stop her, but his hand froze midair. He knew he had lost that right. The same hand that had struck her in anger now hung powerless at his side. Mama Kindi lowered her gaze, unable to meet Amara's eyes. The woman she once called weak had just shown strength that no command or insult could ever break. The guests parted as she walked past, some lowering their heads in shame for the silence they had kept, others watching with quiet admiration. To them, Amara was no longer just Darius's wife. She was a symbol of courage, of patience, of a woman who refused to be broken. As she stepped out of the hall and into the cool night air, she felt the weight on her chest lift. She wasn't leaving in defeat. She was leaving stronger, freer, and with her dignity intact. Behind her were whispers, shame, and the ruins of a man who thought he could control her. Ahead of her was peace, and for the first time in years, a future she could choose for herself. Do you want me to now complete the final part 15? The story that shook the nation, 350 word. By the very next morning, Amara's story was everywhere. In the markets of Zamora, people whispered her name with awe. Newspapers carried the headline of her bold stand, radio stations replayed the drama, and on social media, her courage spread like fire. Videos of the night showed her standing tall while Darius crumbled, and people shared it thousands of times. She was no longer remembered as the woman who was slapped at a dinner table. That moment became just the beginning of something greater. She was remembered as the woman who exposed lies, who uncovered betrayal, and who chose dignity over silence. Her calm strength touched the hearts of women who had suffered in silence, and men who once ignored such pain now felt shame. Everywhere, people spoke about her bravery. Some called her the voice for women who could not yet speak. Others said she gave hope that truth, no matter how hidden, could never be silenced forever. Even those who didn't know her personally felt connected to her courage. Meanwhile, Darius's name became a shadow of what it once was. His business partners pulled away, his friends distanced themselves, and the respect he once demanded turned into pity and disgust. Amara, on the other hand, walked freely into her new life. Her story was no longer just hers. It became a lesson for the nation. She proved that true power lies not in wealth or pride, but in dignity, truth, and the strength to walk away. Would you like me to now combine all 15 parts into one full-flowing script, around 4,000 words? So it reads as a complete, powerful viral story without breaks?